All right, thanks, folks. Hopefully you got some sugar to keep you awake for the next little bit. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Sachs. I lead the identity team at Google. But today I'm here more as a representative of the OpenID Foundation to talk about one of the other big projects we've got there called the Account Chooser. So how many of you have heard me talk about this before by raise of hands? That side of the room. Interesting. They're all sitting close. I don't know if that's good or bad. So there are some interesting updates to it, in particular that AccountCheckChooser.com is actually available as of this week. But for the rest of you, let's give you some background on what this is. So the general thing here is to try to get rid of passwords on the internet as much as possible, especially getting rid of password reuse, which hopefully you all understand the problems with it. I think today was NVIDIA losing passwords and Playboy Europe losing passwords. Every day we get more of them. But still, most websites are, to mention before, getting users to log in with an email address password. We have started to see some websites adding these identity provider buttons. So, for example, here is Yahoo's login page, where you can log in with your email address and password like normal. But great, they've added these options to also log in simply by clicking the Facebook and Google button. And if everything works well, you just click it and you're logged in. Well, that's in the best case. Unfortunately, anyone who works in user experience who looks at that box says, oh my God, buttons everywhere, form fields, links, this is just overwhelming for the average user. And we do see that. A lot of users presented with this stuff just get scared and run away, especially if they're less technically sophisticated. Another problem we've started to see as we've gotten more adoption of identifiers is edge cases around shared computers. So I have a daughter who, like most kids, seems to be too technical given how little training she has on it. Every once in a while, she will get on my computer, and she's figured out how to log into her Google account and Facebook account. So if I come along to Yahoo, click the Facebook button, and log in, I may unwillingly do so as her. Frequently, wouldn't you actually notice this fact? If I posted some message out to my social stream from Yahoo, well, I've just embarrassed her and embarrassed me. Right? So we still have a lot of work to do. What I'm going to talk about here is a new service to help improve the user experience. So the end goal and what's actually now possible is, let's an example here. Let's say I, as an employee of a company, I work at Google, I want to visit our company's new 401k provider. Never been there before. But in my browser, I type acdirect401k.com, hit return, and the first screen I see is this one. It's a screen that has some marketing information about the site I'm visiting, but magically to me as a user has this list of accounts that my browser remembers I frequently use on this computer. And in the best case, I would simply click my work account, the esax@google.com address, and I'd be logged in. Let's take another example. Let's say I, as an end user, it's lunchtime, I want to take a break. I've heard about some new online game called Crib Wars. So I type cribwars.com on my browser, hit return, and the next screen I see is this one. Again, some marketing information about the site and a list of accounts I frequently use on this computer. And in this case, I want to use my personal account. So I might go click my eric.sachs@gmail.com address. But if you look closely there, right underneath it is the word facebook.com. That happens to be an identity provider available for this account. And this particular website, Crib Wars, wants to get a lot of social virality, so it prefers using Facebook as an identity provider. So when I click that, again, by talking to Facebook, the website can get me logged in, maybe send me to a sign-up flow if necessary. So that's the end goal to get to. Obviously, that's not where most websites are. So let me talk about how we see this possibly evolving. So here I'm going to use the example of a site that I've been logging into as an employee, let's say for years, with my corporate email address and password that has been synced to this SaaS provider. They're so unsophisticated they don't even use SAML or anything like that. So traditionally, if I want to log in, I hit the sign in link, presented with the page I hate, asking for an email address and password. I'd go ahead and type my information. Now, what I'm about to show you is a service to achieve that user experience. I just, I'm showing you myself. Technically speaking, if this website wants to change their UI to what I just showed you, they only have to do two things. The first is add a couple lines of JavaScript to their existing sign-in and sign-up page. The second thing they need to do is expose an API from their servers that, given an email address, decides whether it's one that's registered, in which case asks the user to authenticate, or not registered, in which case do the sign-up flow. So very little technical work. So if the website did do that, and I came back to the same site and clicked sign in, what they would see is this. That's, again, a screen with marketing information about the site, a list of the accounts that I might want to use there, and I could go ahead and click my work address. So I go ahead and click that. And the next screen I see is, well, this one. So darn, I'm still asked for my password. But actually, already here, there's a significant amount of improvement that leads into the next stage. The first thing is that the site got my email address and was able to look at it and decide, should it send me down a sign up flow, big long registration form, the email address pre-filled, or should it send me to a sign up flow and try to get me authenticated? So that's the first advantage. The second advantage is I, as a user, didn't have to type my email address. It's pre-filled for me. And in particular on mobile devices, obviously any time you can avoid the user having to type something, that's a big win. So here the website is deployed an account chooser, but you notice it does nothing right now with identity providers or OpenID or SAML of any of that. But once it's done this step, then let's say the website decides, okay, I want to start adding support for identity providers, maybe only for a small segment of my users, like the users from the company Google.com. Maybe I've connected to Google.com via SAML or OpenID because they pay a lot for the SaaS service. Well, if they do that, now if the user comes back to the same site, it's the sign-in link, they'll see exactly the same screen they saw a moment ago. The marketing site, the list of accounts they might want to use. And so the key thing to note here from a user experience perspective is that nothing really changed for the user. There was this point at which they would log in by clicking their picture and being asked for their password. Now they click their picture and they're just signed in. So in this case, they're even signed into their existing account. So that's how we want to help websites transition from the way they might operate today with passwords to actually getting out of the password business. But in particular, we want to avoid a problem that a lot of websites have seen if they experiment with identity providers, which is an increase in customer support calls, especially with these complicated login boxes UIs that I was showing you a few minutes ago with buttons and links all over the place. Now, this service, it's based on a user experience we call Account Chooser, and it's an effort, as I mentioned, with the OpenID Foundation. So hopefully most of you all know that what the OpenID Foundation is by now, but it's a neutral organization that has members like Google, Ping, Genring, Vidya, Yahoo, Intel, Symantec, PayPal, Facebook, a bunch of others like that. And what we now are running is a central service called accountchooser.com. And for the last year, we've been talking about this, telling people that it was actually going to come. So today is the first day that we're publicly saying it's actually available, Yahoo, but then sort of please keep it quiet. So the service is available, and what we're actually looking for is early adopters to help us refine the experience before we do a more aggressive promotion of it. And I'm going to talk about some of the experiments that are going on. But you all are a relatively sophisticated audience, leaders in your space, so we're hoping you will put out the word or possibly experiment with us yourselves. Now, if you went to accountchooser.com, even on your own laptop today, because you had never used it, it wouldn't know what accounts you wanted to use, so you'd see this page. And if you want to jump ahead, play with it, there's a link at the top to explore a sample site. And if you go there, we'll help you go through the flow of adding an account. That part is ugly hacky. Don't worry about that. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But after you've had an account once, log out and then try to go back and log into that site again, and you'll start to get a feel for how it works. If you as a website do want to actually experiment with integrating with the test system or live system, down at the bottom is a big orange button, that OpenID orange color we all love, that actually will point you to information on how to do the integration. In fact, if you click it, it will take you to another website called accountchooser.net. This is a very marketing-oriented website. This website we'll be promoting in a couple months through the OpenID Foundation. But it has this technical information on how to actually integrate with the account chooser. And then it has links to some of the OpenID Foundation members' products and services to help companies who want to either just add an account chooser or who also want to add support for identity providers. You're a geek crowd, though, so I assume you guys would like to know a little bit of how this works, and I'm hoping to get some good questions at the end. So the key functionality that Account Chooser provides is the idea that any website on the internet that wants to, no pre-registration or transport or anything, any website that wants to can include this one JavaScript file from accountchooser.com, and with it, during its sign-in flow, it can cause the user to be bounced to accountchooser.com, where the user will be shown a list of the accounts they might want to use. Now, an important thing to understand is this accountchooser.com domain, it has no storage, it has no login. All it is a static site that serves up an HTML5 app that runs in your browser, and it keeps the list of accounts in your browser. So it's in many ways easier to think of it as a browser extension or even a feature of the browser itself. Now, the next thing is when the site redirects the user to accountu.com to select this list of accounts, by default, all accountu.com is going to show as the name of the website that you're going to log into. But based on talking to a lot of websites who are interested in deploying this, we wanted to offer the ability for them to show some of this more specific marketing information around the list of accounts. So there's the ability to provide templates of information shown in the header, the footer, and the right nav. And to make sure this is done in a secure way, there's a technology called Kaha that's used to sanitize those templates. But this whole page gets shown here, and the only decision for the user is clicking on a picture, not particularly hard. Now, when the user does click on a picture, what happens at that point is the name, email address, and photo of the account they've selected gets passed back to the site where they started. Another important thing to note here is what doesn't happen. There's no security or fancy cryptography or protocols with how that information is transmitted back. It's basically equivalent to the user having typed it manually in the email address field of the browser. And it is then up to the website to decide how the heck are they going to authenticate the user who claims to be, for example, Sachs at Google.com. Now, one way a website might do that authentication is to ignore the concept of identity providers, take that email address, and just ask the user what their password is. Again, first it would look at the email address and decide, maybe the user needs to go through a sign-up flow. But assuming the user is registered, it could show a screen like this and ask the user, okay, what the heck is your password? That's a nice start, but then obviously we're trying to get websites with the idea that they might deploy support for identity providers. So when the site got this email address, it could look up that email address and decide, oh, that's an email address that is connected to Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, or maybe in this case it's an enterprise SaaS vendor. It can look up and say, oh, that email address is from a corporate domain that is deployed to SAML or Google Apps or Ping1 IDP. In any case, if that happens, the website would be able to just bounce the user to the IDP, and when they come back, they're logged in. Now, one of the particular areas that we're hard even to get them to sign in. And so we're looking at that as a particular area where we can provide value to websites. So let's say you've got a website, that's done this work with account user and already logged in, but they have their own Android app or iOS app. Well, if they do, unfortunately, they can't do the traditional thing of having that mobile app ask for the user's username and password because the website no longer has a password for everyone. So what can it do instead? Well, in this example, let's say using Wells Fargo mobile app, it could be anything. When the user first opens the application after downloading it, the app says, I'm not connected to any user account. So what it does is it opens the main web browser, not an embedded browser, but the main web browser, and redirects the user to the home page of the site. Now, assuming the user is not logged into that site, the site can say, oh, well, it looks like there's some account entries in accountuser.com, so let me bounce the user over there. So the first screen the user actually sees is the one on the left. Here's a list of accounts you might want to use with this mobile app. The user picks one. It's brought back to the website. The website uses identity provider to get the user logged in. As soon as the user is logged in, the site says, great, I know who the user is, so let me generate a token that I'm now going to hand back to the mobile app. The mobile app gets a token, makes some calls back to the server, and now has the user's account data. So the user in this case might see their banking activity. But the only screen the user saw in the middle was a screen to pick their account. That's it. And this will work on Android, BlackBerry, iPhone, etc. And in particular, you notice the screen on the left for selecting accounts is very optimized for the mobile experience. Big buttons the user can press, and we've done everything we can to take out the need for users to actually do any typing. Another thing you might hopefully be wondering is, okay, how did this list of accounts get there in the first place? Well, there are a couple of different ways that could happen. I'm going to talk about 2 to 3 of them right now. So let me go back to my earlier stories. I showed the example of, a father and a daughter who share a computer, and I saw their accounts listed on the page. Let's say the wife, Sarah, she also wants to use their computer. She happens to be a Yahoo Mail user. So most people, they get a new computer. The first account where they take the password tends to be their email provider or social network provider. So let's say she navigates to Yahoo, types her Yahoo ID and password. Right after she does that and gets authenticated, her email provider could, if they want, redirect her to a screen like this. The UI is being refined a little bit. Where basically it redirects her back to accountchu.com with the suggestion of an account she might want to add. The user now has to specifically give their consent to add this account. If you didn't get the user's consent, you get website dropping porn entries or something in this list. So the user has to give their consent to add this account. There are also options to skip it or disable it if they don't like the feature. But once she has done that, then she's back in her Yahoo account or Yahoo mailbox or something and can get on with her day. But at any point in the future, if she goes to a website integrated with accountchu.com, her account will be there with her picture. And if she wanted to log in at the site with her account, she just simply clicks her picture and is done. So that's the most optimal way this could work. But let's say her email provider isn't that sophisticated, hasn't deployed that yet. But she goes to that same crib wars site, that her husband Eric, that would be mentioned, and she wants to try it out herself, but she doesn't see her account listed here. Well, there's a button down at the bottom, sign into another account. So she goes ahead and clicks that. Now at that point, the user is redirected from accountchu.com back to the website where the user started. And it's up to that website to decide how to get the user signed in or signed up. And maybe that's only done with email address and passwords, but maybe it's done with a screen that we in the tech community or data community lovingly or not so lovingly refer to as the NASCAR page. So this is this page that attempts to discover the user's identity provider, big long list of buttons, can't even fit all the possible ones here, maybe a place to go to their email address. So it's hard to make this page look good, but it's a fallback option if necessary. So in this case, Sarah might click the Yahoo Mail button or type her Yahoo email address, would get bounced back to Yahoo, and as soon as she's logged into the site is able to detect, oh, she's using an account that's not yet on the accountchooser.com. So the next thing it can do is send the user to accountchooser.com and say, why don't you add this account? Because as soon as you do, from now on this computer, you'll always see that entry listed. So it's not an action the user has to take once per site. It's an action the user only has to take once ever per computer. And then once they do, go to any of these websites using accountchooser.com, click the account she wants to use, and boom, she's signed in. Now, Google has actually been experimenting with this for about a year. And it is actually our goal that in the future, when someone logs into google.com, either with a Gmail address or some other address used to log into Google, we will immediately, upon authenticating you, bounce you to accountchooser.com, get you, if you consent, to add that entry, so that Google will in turn help bootstrap a couple billion users having an entry to an accountchooser on billions of devices that they use. And we want to do that to help provide a higher proposition for websites to integrate with accountchooser.com. That is our goal. However, there's a little bit of a gotcha. I just said accountchooser.com, we're announcing it for the first time today, and then I said Google's been experimenting with this for a year. Obviously, we haven't been experimenting with accountchooser.com for a year. For the next couple weeks, we're still in a mode that's a little bit different. What we do is if you are part of this experiment, you log into Google, we keep a list of accounts in a cookie running on google.com as opposed to on accountchooser.com. And so it only ends up becoming helpful if you log into websites that are integrated with Google. However, we've used exactly the same user experience. We're literally the same JPEG on the screen that we've shown on accountchooser.com and Google as experiments to get user feedback on what works and what doesn't work. And over the next couple weeks, it is our goal to do the integration with accountchooser.com now that it's live so we can use that. So if you want to play around with that yourself, there's this link here. It's been available for a year. I talked about it last year. Some of you may have already gone and opted in. And like I say, in a few weeks, it'll get even better. Interestingly, over the last 6 months or so, we started requiring all Google employees to use it, which is a lot of them. That's been a good source of feedback. But more interestingly, starting in about March of this year, we started doing a promotion where in the United States, for English users, if we saw a computer that had been used with multiple Google accounts, say, husband, wife, kid, or maybe a person who has both a personal account and a work account they use to log in Google, we looked for these scenarios, and we actually did a promo at the bottom of our login box saying, hey, would you like to turn on this new feature? And the results have been fantastic, much better than we expected. A lot more people turning it on, very few turning it off. The feedback has been great. Another interesting historical note is our work to experiment with this accountchooser at Google started off specifically targeting people for whom Google did not have a password. In particular, it was enterprise employees who ran a SAML IDP who are logging into our Google Apps corporate email hosting service. And we're trying to figure out how to improve the user experience for them logging in. But when we started to deploy this as an experiment, we found that most of the people opting in were actually just Gmail users who found it was an improved user experience for them. Again, in particular, if they had multiple accounts on the device. So we've now started to primarily target that group. And that's, again, why we start suggesting to websites, hey, websites, if you're authenticating all users with passwords today, consider adding an account chooser sort of as a baby step before adding support for identity providers if you want to avoid a lot of help desk calls. So just to summarize, and then we'll turn it over, and I'm hoping a sophisticated group will give interesting questions, so apparently this side of the room has heard me talk too much. The accountchooser.com service, for the first time as of last week, is available online. If you want to go ahead and play with it, please do so. Give us feedback. There are these demo sites, but in particular, what we're looking for is websites to go click that orange button down at the bottom, or just go to accountchooser.net and actually do the integration with your website. Give us some feedback on the technical integration, which think about the API model, as well as we're looking for websites who will actually deploy this out to their customers and start giving us feedback on how it's working. There are already a number of websites we know are experimenting with account chooser, so not just Google, but others working quite well. This being a very technically sophisticated group, hopefully some of you want to do even more than just integrate it with your website. Some of you may want to understand the underlying details of how this works. So if you click this techies link on the side of the page, that'll bring you to a screen with links to the working group for both OpenID Connect we've been talking about today, but also the account chooser working group. That page has a lot more demos, documentation, details, guides on how this works. And so we hope some of you would read that and give feedback, and even consider participating in the account chooser working group itself to help us figure out how to evolve it. So that's the quick spiel about our efforts to try to help get a lot of websites go out there and kill the passwords they have. Tomorrow afternoon, some of you will hopefully be attending that I'm running, called How Google's going to Help You Get Out of the Password Business. You can go to sleep while I give exactly the same presentation, and we have 2.5 hours of a lot more detail about what's actually required, because people were asking some good questions before. Have we seen growth in relying parties? The answer is yes. Google's traffic to our identity provider has skyrocketed from 0 to something interesting. Interesting is not having eliminated passwords on the internet. We see solving this user experience problem as a key portion of that, but there are still some other challenges we see that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. And then on Thursday, I will be giving a keynote session where, again, I apologize, we'll be going through most of these slides, plus a couple more related to attribute exchange. But I wanted to turn it over now, because I think we still have 10-ish minutes to see if there are any questions from the group that I could answer about how this works. And we'll see who we got. Start.
So we've got a use case that we want to do something very similar in that we've got a couple of different IDPs that we want people to be able to log in with a bunch of different sites, and we don't want to have all of our different sites. This is within our sort of
in a closed group, right?
Yeah. So we don't want to have each of these different sites implement their own UI to handle all of this. And so the problem, though, is that we can't use accountchooser.com because you can't use a Google account to log into any of our stuff.
Right.
Someday,
yes.
Convince people. But certainly not yet. But even so, we'd like to use as much of that stuff as we can, up to and including the same protocol.
Right.
To talk back to all of the different sites. Right now, what we're doing is something that we actually, it's a really simple redirect, very similar to account chooser. We send somebody over to a JavaScript, and they come back with an OpenID Connect issuer URL.
Right.
And we log in off of that issuer URL and call it a day. From that point, it's connected.
So there are two things you can do. The first to do it, and it's kind of confusing, there is no requirement that a website do anything with identity providers if it uses accountchooser.com. So no requirement that you support Google as an identity provider or anyone as an identity provider. But then you mentioned that you have a specific list of identity providers. So one of the options you have is when a website redirects the user to accountchooser.com and says, hey, accountchooser.com, can you display a list of accounts? By default, accountchooser.com will just display the email addresses that it knows about and nothing else. The next mode is you can tell account.com, hey, show just everything you got, every entry, and if you know an identity provider for the account or multiple identity providers for the same email address, please show them all. And then the last one is you give account.com a whitelist of IDPs. And you say, please just filter based on the ones associated with this. Right now, that's a little bit hard to find in the documentation, so yes. So, but if you drill down, you can actually find that stuff and play around with it. And we're already using that in some other cases. So maybe you can give us some feedback on how to make the documentation easier to understand for that use case.
Well, the other half of that use case is I think it'll be hard for me to convince people that even that part of the login process.
Well, anybody knows. Right now, like I said, country.com is just a static page of OpenID Foundation controls. But yes,
Yeah,
that'll go on anyways.
I totally understand that. However, it's not on our servers.
Oh, no.
Who knows what's going to happen
now. Yes, we should all run our own email providers too. Yes, exactly.
So yeah. Anyway.
Cool. Okay, can I go on to the next one because you know how to reach me?
But the end of my question is, can we just get your code and run it ourselves?
Yeah, actually the other thing we did this week is there's a full open source copy of all the code for country.com posted. It's all, static stuff, and there even instruction says just copy all these files, put it in your own site, and just change these 3 lines in your configuration parameter, and you're good to go.
Awesome, thanks.
Right? In blue shirt back there.
Competition, incumbent, ESSO product,
Right. Yes, certainly this isn't the first attempt to do it. I'm not even sure it's the 10th. So a lot of what we've done is tried to talk to people who've deployed earlier versions of this stuff, like information cards was a big, source of information. This Mozilla's browser ID, the SAML education community did a lot of work. Some of the examples you talked about in the enterprise corporate single sign-on area and SaaS providers have been helpful. And we've just been trying to gather, best of breed scenarios. But in particular, one of the problems we've been trying to solve is scalable IDP discovery. Take an enterprise SaaS vendor like, say, a Salesforce or WebEx, who has potentially, 1 million corporate domains who have employees logging into them. Almost none of these other technologies that we talked about could possibly scale. Or even if it's a website who's trying to be consumer-oriented, but it wants to support any email address in the world, well, there are, hundreds and thousands of pretty sizable email providers around the world. You can't have buttons for all of them. So in particular, we've been trying to find an approach that scales where, any email provider, a corporation, a school, an email provider who's not big enough to get on that button list can push an entry into this central list, and then their employees can get a much more friendly federated login experience. But again, we've been trying to go out proactively to the different groups who have experimented with this, get them involved in the work group to see if there are things that work for them, or honestly, we've mostly been trying to learn what didn't work. There's usually a much larger list of those, and make sure we don't make the same mistakes. Can I go to the yellow shirt right in the back?
Yeah, beyond authentication, are there other books being looked at for provisioning other identity?
And there are 2 different ways to do that. One of them is you could say that countries.com is only designed to discover the email address the user wants to do, and it's nothing to do with identity providers, except it does provide 3 attributes: name, email address, and photo. Right? So actually there have been quite a lot of requests for us to add the ability for it also to contain citizenship and date of birth as user self-assertions. In particular, a number of different countries, US included, have laws that require a website to make a reasonable attempt to get a user to self-assert their age, for different categories. This might be a helpful way to do it, or other preferences like do not track or other privacy preferences could potentially be placed in here. A couple of us have experimented with user experience for that and haven't found something we're happy with, but the model could potentially be extended in that manner. However, those would, by definition, be attributes that weren't verified if they're only stored in the account.com. But again, possibly there's the ability to just, with technology like OpenID, to extend this, where if that set of attributes is patched to the site, and the site says, oh, I want to verify these, and account.com can say, well, this user has this source over here to verify these attributes, then, boom, that might extend it. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow and in the Thursday keynote about the attribute exchange network. I'm going to go 2 rows in front of you.
Yeah, so just you said we
at a high level, Google has nothing to do with it, right? We are trying to help document best practices and where possible contribute to these working groups in the open source code. But I think Ping is doing some good workshops this week about OAuth and mobile apps. And actually, like, one of the things I sort of, skipped over is, okay, what's the best practice for, in this case, Wells Fargo generating the token that's given back to their app, and how does that app make API calls back to its server with that token? That is a model where OAuth 2 has some standards for it. A little heavy, there's some shortcuts you can take. But as an industry, it would be nice if we could get to a point where we say, you know what, this is just the standard toolkit for doing it. Because, again, once one company's done this and written, it's pretty easy for others to copy. Right. Let me go way in the back. I'm ignoring this side of the room since you guys have all heard me talking about it in the blue shirt. That's right. Yeah, so these consent pages where users asked, hey, do you want to share your address book, with this other website, or your mailbox, or your friends list? For years, those of us who've been involved in the OAuth community have beat our head against the wall in terms of what the best practice is. I'm sure many of you all have seen these social network sites who in the past would say, oh, you just signed up for Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Why don't you give me your Gmail email address and password? And I will go break into your account, steal your stuff, and then it'll be good. And everybody does it, right? Whereas instead, when we send users through these OAuth consent flows, funny enough, fewer people will go through those flows. So we know we are lacking something in that consent process, which is understandable by users. And there are a set of people who believe that if we had more consistency in that consent user experience, like, say, having it shown by a central service that would enforce some standards, then it might help get users more confidence with what is actually going on. But that's right now still an unproven scenario. Does that help answer your question, though? Like I say, come get involved in the working group. We definitely want to experiment with that. Cool. Way in the front, yellow shirt. And then we can go to this side.
That you're sharing information about the user, picture, email address, their name. You're talking about potentially other attributes. It concerns me that someone's going to find a way to clickjack that and be able to just, without even the user knowing it, be able to get access to that information.
Of course, yes. And that's one of the advantages of having 10 companies, many of whom would like to stab each other in the back, looking over the code that's used for this type of stuff. I mean, the same is true of OpenID or SAML itself. You find a protocol flaw in one of these, you can drive some big backdoors into a lot of systems. And one of the reasons that Google is involved in efforts like the OpenID Foundation is we don't believe that Google is going to find all of those. We want this stuff out in the public domain. We want the code, the protocols out there, so anyone around the world can beat at it, find such a hole, and notify the, hopefully the organization ahead of time. I think in the last year we've had 3 different reports to the OpenID Foundation of, different areas where people suggest we make improvements. There may be ones out there we don't know of, but that's what we believe in doing this as transparently as possible, as opposed to in some proprietary way. For example, with Google, with Chrome, we could just natively put this into the Chrome browser and just store the list there. But there have been security problems with browsers too. They're not perfect either. So I'm not going to claim it's ever going to be perfect, but this is our reason for doing it as open as possible.
I'm wondering if instead of actually passing that information, the identity provider we have registered creates an anonymized credential or identifier for that user that only that identity provider actually knows anything about.
Right.
That's realistically all you need to pass that. You need to know who the identity provider is in that credential.
Right.
You're not actually exposing anything other than if 2 websites notice it's happening.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed is most of the demand we've seen from this are websites who want to use it as a stepping stone to adding support for identity providers, not afterwards. So there you don't even have identity providers involved. So we have been looking, actually, if any of the folks from Mozilla with Browser ID and Persona, they've been looking at techniques to try to do that. Unfortunately, when we went down and actually looked at the actual protocols and attack vectors, we ended up realizing we weren't sure how to do that securely without storing more sensitive information in this central domain than just email address. Like some of those identifiers themselves can be problematical, and in many cases you end up having to have cryptographic tokens. So I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that, but Mozilla's effort that's similar to this, and I'll talk about it more tomorrow, is called persona.org, and they've been doing some experiments with that, and they're also looking for people to help them if you want to get involved. Let me switch over to this side of the room, another yellow shirt. Everyone with yellow shirt can ask questions.
So
just to have one username and password. And
Sure.
90% of the sites.
So one of the nice things about Google, my team, the identity team at Google, we report to our search organization. I don't report to our, what's our social, Google Plus. So I don't report to our social thing. I don't report to our Google Apps thing. I report to our search team. And the reason for that is our search team has said the goal for our identity team is to get to the point where a user, and there's some self-entredness here, a user can click a search result or ad result on any Google site and would expect that when they go to that site, even if they've never been there before, they could sign in or sign up easily. That is the goal that we are set to achieve. We're not supposed to go out there and get every website to have a Google account, but if they have a Facebook button, honestly, my goals are achieved from our search team perspective. So that's what we're going to continue to achieve to. My best guess at this point is I think this user experience work that we're doing will start getting large momentum in early next year. I think the next set of problems that we're dealing with is the large websites who are relying parties who have a help desk, meaning there's an 800 number somebody can call. They've experienced a lot of increased help desk calls related to the concept of identity providers. There's a lot of edge cases with account management that aren't handled well. Until those are handled in an automatic self-service way by some tools from like Bing and Google and Generain, et cetera, I think we'll continue to see them holding off. At least next summer, and then at that point you'll be able to go to long-tail, non-sophisticated sites. Say, listen, here's a way to run your login system. You won't get increased help desk calls. People won't complain your UI sucks, and actually get them out of the password business. And honestly, the daily leaks of passwords that are happening and giving black eyes to websites are causing a large increase in the frequency of them, contacting OpenID Foundation and us. But at least a year at best. Are you coming to my session tomorrow? Cool. Okay. How about let me talk about it more in detail there, because there's some longer version of that. And then there was one other person over here.
You mentioned info cards.
Yes.
A similar metaphor.
Yeah.
I'm trying to really understand what you just said. It looks to me like you have moved the selector piece, which was at the OS level at the client level. You moved this as a selector as a service.
Correct. Yeah, basically we moved it to HTML, an HTML5 app that we can dynamically update. One of our problems with InfoCard, or one problem Microsoft reported with InfoCard, is they couldn't update the software very frequently, and any website that integrated with it had to inherently deal with the fact that there were like 15 different old versions of it out there on different people's computers that they had to support. And that's a real pain in the butt. Here we have an app that shouldn't need to be updated very frequently, but can, if the organization decides there's a new feature for it, can just immediately be updated on all the browsers out there. So websites only have to support, like 1 or 2 major versions at a time. And to be honest, like I say, if you look back in the industry, we're 99% failure and 1% success. So we need the ability to iterate on a lot more failure here if we're going to continue to improve. And we need to be able to do it quickly, not like once per year on software cycles. Does that help? Answer your question? Cool. Okay, I have one more question from another yellow shirt, and then Pam, I think you guys wanted to move on. Is that right?
You have 2 examples, one being Wells Fargo and the other being your property itself.
Right.
So I guess the question comes down to where is the security there? You just open up your device, and your daughter can go in there and say, oh, look, I'm there, you're there. What's the stopper from logging into you?
Nothing.
Same thing as the Wells Fargo app. Get that mobile application. All they have to do is open up the Wells Fargo, click on that, and they can access all of it.
Correct.
So while we're saving the user a lot of work, why are we opening up some significant security holes or requiring them to take control of, make sure there's no one breaks into their device or
yeah.
platform?
So if you come to the next IIW workshop in fall, I'm hoping to talk a lot about this. Google has been spending a lot of time looking at what are the scenarios where people are sharing a browser, and really, it already exists. The people are saving their passwords in their browser, to be honest. So we're not changing the problem, we don't believe. What we have been looking at is, okay, how can we detect those scenarios, and in a way that the user wants to, help the father and daughter end up with different cookie jars or different OS level accounts. We have seen that as devices have gotten cheaper, more and more people have dedicated laptops or dedicated iPhones or something like that. But still, the percentage of people who have at least one shared computer in the house hasn't changed much, and it's still pretty high. Microsoft has done a lot trying to get people to use different OS level accounts. It's been too heavyweight. The browser vendors have been playing around with a feature of the browsers in Firefox and Chrome called profiles, where you can have basically different cookie jars separated from each other that are locked. And in particular, Google wants to do a lot in that area. But won't have much time to talk about that this week. But if you come to the big IAW workshop in fall, we'll talk about it.
Less worried about sharing it through that, more as someone takes my cell phone.
Right.
And
John looks like he's jumping up and down to answer this question.
So this is account chooser is just where are you from? It is not authenticating to that relying party. There's still either a SAML or OpenID 2 or OpenID Connect. So essentially,
getting rid of passwords. Because when
well,
you get rid of passwords, the way you're talking about, you'd still be introducing passwords.
Getting rid of passwords at relying parties. You may still have a password at your IDP. You may have some sort of multi-factor authentication. You may have biometrics built into the device or other things. It's removing passwords at the relying party, not necessarily completely at the identity provider. The goal is not to allow anybody who gets your phone to be able to get into all of your devices, all of your accounts without any kind of security. And that account chooser merely is an account selection process. It isn't an authentication step.
It's a hint mechanism. That's all it is.
Which makes sense, although all the flows he's suggesting, including his Google.com account, was no password required.
Yeah. Well,
and that's
let's be honest, that's where end users want to get to. So sorry for those of you on this side of the room who probably heard this joke, but I've been in this space 20 years. So it used to be that my mom would proudly tell her friends I was the internet login box guy. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I noticed she wasn't describing me as that anymore. And I asked her, Mom, why aren't you telling your friends that that's what I do anymore? She said, do you really want to be known as that? It's true, right? So yes, that is where the end users want to get to. This is a piece of the equation, but it still assumes that you have passwords at least a couple of identity providers. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, where at least Google believes some of that is headed. But we still have job security. I can assure all of you there will be still passwords for you guys to manage for a couple more years.
Just one quick thing about the examples that you went through, right? The examples took the assumption that the person, like you, Eric, were already logged in at Google. So when you click the button on Account Chooser, you get logged into the site. But in reality, right, the relying party was doing a background check with Google to see, are you really logged in? So like if you did it with another identity provider that, let's say, always asks for consent every time you go through the flow, right, you would have seen a consent box in the middle of between clicking on Account Chooser and ending up being logged in into RP. So there's a full authentication loop in the process.
So it's well, we're out of time. So again, I'm going to be talking about that what we call double consent page problem tomorrow. So thank you for you guys' time. I will be around for days. I'm only here to listen to you guys, not talk. I have to talk more than enough this week. So I'm wearing this bright red jacket. I will the whole week. Respond to dinner tonight. Come by, ask me questions, bug me, tell me what you need, or tell some other members of the Account Chooser working group, like Pam, John, David Primer from Google. You want to stand up? I said David Primer is another Googler who could answer even more technical questions.
Yeah.
Vikas?
Yep, Vikas is coming in. One thing, just while he's hooking up, the other really interesting flow that Account Chooser enables that we as identity professionals have not dealt with is the switch user flow. So we have always just, especially in corporate identity, if the user has a session, then that must be the user who was who you wanted to federate as. What Account Chooser gives us is the ability to have the relying party say that Pam Dingle wants to authenticate, and have the identity provider figure out and understand the logic of, wait a minute, the RP is saying it should be Pam Dingle, but it's actually John Smith. And it gives us the tools to actually start making those judgments about whether the right person is logged in. And that's net new, as far as I know, at least.
Can you make him the presenter, or do I need to?
I have done.
Well, at the same time, it's the ability to switch.
Yeah, okay. So consumer identities had the ability to switch for a while. That's a good point. All right, you ready to go?
Yep.
Okay.